created the comunidad section of those two sites, and in the end, I mean, not to get deep into kind of like business deals, but like in the end, we were basically like, okay, we believe in our system. You guys that run these sites don't. We're just going to give you a couple cents per user that you kind of get into our section, and that ended up kind of taking off from there, and people, obviously it went viral. We got like 12 million users the first year, which was, I've been still trying to chase that success.
My name is Kevin David, and if you want real financial freedom for yourselves and for your loved ones today, then the time is now. And I will be there to help you every step of the way. What is up, guys, and welcome back to another exciting podcast. If you're new here, welcome to the family. If you are not new here, then thank you for coming back and supporting the show, leaving reviews on iTunes, and tuning in from YouTube, which is our kind of new focus, or one of them, for the podcast. So today we have a very special guest, somebody who's built companies to 700 million users, and one of the biggest dating companies in the world, and now is actually trying to cure death, so to speak. So Michael, welcome to the show. We appreciate you coming on.
Awesome. Yeah, good to be on here.
Yeah, so let's talk first about and is it pronounced Badoo, or how do you pronounce that?
We actually took it from the Flintstones. So yabba dabba doo. Yeah, so Badoo. Yeah.
Yabba dabba Badoo. Nice. So that was one of the biggest dating sites in the world at the time, or it still is. I'm not actually familiar with it because I'm more of like the Tinder generation. But how did that actually start out? How did you guys have the idea, and how did you start to grow it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I kind of fell. I mean, since we're talking about kind of entrepreneurship today, like I fell kind of backwards into that amazing team that we went on to create Badoo. I was like today it's actually quite interesting because Bezos just went up, or this week or whenever you guys are going to be watching this, and so I always wanted to be an astronaut, and so I was obsessed with the space program. Did aerospace in school. Ended up going over to Russia just because I was interested in the space program. Met a guy who did a bunch of projects in the kind of internet scene in the Russian-speaking markets, and he had one that was kind of like early days dating, but more kind of meet new people, which Badoo kind of ended up being. And so I started working for him on that project. We couldn't internationalize it. And so one day we just kind of decided, like, okay, let's leave that behind. That's doing fine in the Russian-speaking markets. Let's just create something completely new. And so, I mean, I think it's worth saying that we took some of that, those things that were working with that other project, and just try to make it more, I would guess, international, but more kind of, I think, more friendly. We turned it into more of a nightclub and less of the stigma of, like you said, your Tinder generation, like. Back 15 years, it was like, oh, you're looking for someone online. Oh, you must have kind of social problems. You can't hack it offline. So, that's why you're doing a dating site. And so we tried to do that first generation of basically Tinder. What kind of spawned Tinder and a bunch of other great sites. So that was how we kind of got into it. But it started with a great team that kind of came over from another project, and we're like, we like working together. Let's kind of take this to the next level.
And so Andre was involved in Bumble also, at least according to Wikipedia. Or were you involved in Bumble as well?
No, I left before Bumble time. I mean, it was a similar. I mean, so speaking from the outside, so I wasn't inside, so I'm not giving you any inside information on Bumble, but the legal disclaimer there. We definitely always had the idea of kind of. We thought one way to kind of distribute Badoo was to have, kind of the back end was all the stuff that was working, like all the kind of UX interactions and that sort of stuff. And then you could actually just kind of pick and choose what you wanted to change on the front end, and kind of, create something that might appeal to a different audience, right? And so Bumble was definitely like part of that. And obviously Whitney and the team did an amazing job kind of, bringing that to huge heights. So.
Yeah, no, and it's really interesting. Like, what are some of those things that you guys did early on with Badoo, like to get initial users and get traction and that critical momentum?
Yeah, so at the time, and this was very website centric. The what we took is that there was sites where people were like interacting very heavily online, kind of like bulletin board type sites, forums you would say. And so on those sites, there wasn't really a way to, or at least the people running them didn't have a way of kind of bringing them to life and allowing you to really kind of interact and meet with the people. It was very text based, and so what we actually ended up doing, which I mean, we tried a bunch of stuff, like always, you try a bunch of stuff, and one of them ends up working, and you look like a genius. So the thing that actually ended up working is we created the community section for a couple of these sites that were quite popular, but they didn't have a real way to socialize between the users on that site, right? One was an Italian bulletin board type site, like forum, and the other was a Spanish site called Mini Juegos, like little games. And so we created the comunidad section of those two sites, and in the end, I mean, not to get deep into kind of like business deals, but like in the end, we were basically like, okay, we believe in our system. You guys that run these sites don't. We're just going to give you a couple cents per user that you kind of get into our section. And that ended up kind of taking off from there, and people, obviously it went viral. We got like 12 million users the first year, which was, I've been still trying to chase that success in the first year success for the rest of my life, but yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. 12 million users. And then what was the kind of transition into the VPN stuff? How did that come about?
So I left Badoo. I had a couple people, which actually ended up bringing me to, creating Humanity with Pete Ward. But I left Badoo, and I had a couple people close to me over those next couple years got late stage cancer, or got diagnosed with late stage cancer. And so when I was leaving Badoo, and then I was like, okay, well, I want to do something. I feel completely helpless. I can't help these people. I should do something more impactful in the world. And actually, when I look back on Badoo, I think creating Badoo was actually quite impactful. There's probably a lot of people on Earth because of Badoo, literally. But at the time, I was thinking I want to do something more impactful. I didn't know what that meant. I went to New York, and I don't know if you remember this, but like SOPA, actually, it's coming up on the anniversary. SOPA and PIPA were these two internet censorship laws that were going through the U.S. Congress. And I got quite involved because, I didn't really need to do anything. I was kind of like, mentoring some startups. I didn't really need to get a job at the time. And so I got quite involved in that. Didn't really play a huge role, but got at least mentally quite involved in it, and went out to rallies and tried to, work on those, like press the button, call your congressman, those kind of little UXs. And so I really, during that time, I understood that, like, first of all, the internet's a lot more fragile, especially 10 years ago. It's become a little bit more robust now through policy and just the fact that it's more prevalent. But back then in 2010, 2011, like, this could actually kind of change the trajectory of the internet. Like, if a couple laws in the US could actually really damage things. And so at the time, I wasn't thinking, hey, I'll join up with a consumer VPN. But about a year later, I had someone that reached out to me who was the founder, one of the co-founders of AnchorFree. And at first I was like, yeah, I'd love to help you. I just don't really, I'm not going to join the team, but happy to, have some calls. And then eventually I kind of realized on the third call that actually this was what I was looking for all along. I could actually like use my skill set, which just a particular skill set of being able to get a few million people to join something and actually like it. I could use that to protect the internet, because actually we're going to go out there straight directly to the user and go out to eventually 700 million users, and we're going to protect the internet from that side, right? And so that was, that was the moment where I was like, okay, I'll come over. So I jumped on like a flight, I was over in Moscow at the time, actually, just hanging out for a few months. And so I jumped on a flight, like all the way to the valley, got off the flight, went to like 6 hours of meetings with the team. By the end of the day, in one shot of tequila, I was like, okay, I'm in. So that's how I joined up.
I love that. And so 700 million users is insane. That's like 1/10 of the entire world. Like, how did you guys
There's
do
no way
that?
to actually get your head around that either. It's
No.
like you say like 7 million users, and then you say 700 million, and like your head doesn't actually register too much difference between the two things. But yeah, I mean, I think one thing to say is that we were able to capture, well, first, before I joined the team on desktop, they were able to capture something amazing, which they actually like wrap a bunch of technology that no one really cared about or knew how it worked wrap it and just like hand it to the user, press a button, everything's going to be cured kind of, product, which I love. Uh, but I think it was just a bunch of, I mean, this is always these things with these questions, right? Is like, it was actually just a string of predominantly good, some bad, but predominantly good decisions over like, a 3-4 year period. I would say that when you have these kind of projects, you don't need to get revenue right away, but the second you have like a real revenue stream from something, it really opens up your options. Because once we could actually know that we were going to convert, say, 6% of our users to the subscription, then I could actually start, bringing in, marketing people and being like, okay, if we can acquire them for this price, let's keep acquiring them. And so that did explode the last, couple years I was there, because we were able to do that. Um, and we just, I think people were cheering for us, to a certain extent. We were the investments that they made that they could talk about at dinner parties. So that's always good.
And did you guys find those users primarily with paid media, like with like ads, or was it more organic or like content driven marketing, or what?
It was The majority was organic, as in, we got to the top of it. I mean, the distribution methods were basically be at the top of the app store, and people will find you when they're looking for, privacy, or, anti-censorship or unblocking. Um, and so it was majority organic, but then once we were able to get a consistent kind of revenue stream, uh, it ended up probably in the end being like 40-60, 40 paid, 60 organic. If we had, we would have kept growing if we had turned down the marketing, but there wasn't any reason to, because it was, ROI positive.
So let's talk about humanity. So I mean, I kind of jokingly said you're trying to cure death, right? But like, what is the mission with humanity? How did it come about?
Yeah. And so kind of, yeah, going back to why one of the reasons I left Badoo, and on the personal side, even though on one side I found one great mission, which was protecting the internet, and found a great team that was already doing that and jumped on with them. On the personal side, I still had this kind of, feeling that if I didn't spend a bunch of time figuring out what could have been done for those two people that passed away from cancer, if I didn't spend time doing that, I was just going to find myself in that same situation again. And it might be me, it might be my wife, it might be, whoever close to me, right? And so I kept on going through those years and having talks with, first, why aren't we screening everybody for cancer? The answer was too many false positives in the test. So if you screened everybody, you tell a bunch of people they might have cancer when they don't, which would, is bad. And so the first answer was, okay, well, my first question as like an engineer, from my aerospace days, okay, how do you take the false positives out of the test? And so people were saying genetic sequencing, which we're actually coming to fruition with like Grail and Gallery. So genetic sequencing put into these tests, you'll get rid of the false positives. So I went from them to stem cell researchers, and then when I was out in the valley, there was just a whole amazing group of people that were kind enough to answer all my stupid questions. And what I saw sometimes, I guess this is maybe a learning for everybody. Like sometimes when you're actually the outsider and you don't know that much, it's easier to pick up signal in a lot of these conversations, because the people that are the experts are like deep in it, right? They're really into the minutia of it. You're just kind of picking up the wider kind of, swaths of it. And so what I started to get a signal from is that all these scientists were spending a lot of their time looking at the loss of function that happened. Can we measure the loss of function that happens in this system that we're looking at? So if it's an immunologist, they were looking at, the loss of function in the immune system. If there's a stem cell researcher, the loss of function in the stem cell cycle. And so for me as a product person, because, I'm a product guy, I'm a funnel guy. So for me, that was like, oh, you could actually really measure this. So what's better than like detecting, cancer early is actually detecting your body moving towards a susceptibility to cancer, years in the future, right? And so when I heard that this is possible, then I kind of started really digging in. I brought in Pete Ward, my now co-founder, who had an amazing career, kind of one of the first social networks over in Europe. So we're two consumer tech guys. And I convinced him, which was my first job, and I really wanted him to co-found this thing with me. And so when we were both on board, then it was just a question, okay, how quickly and how best to bring this superpower out to people, which is basically how can you measure the loss of function in your body over time, which we all colloquially will call, we call it aging, right? So aging is the loss of function in your body over time, and we can measure it. So that's why we ended up creating Humanity. Is actually you can pretty soon next month, anybody can go to the App Store and they'll be able to download. If you have iOS, we'll get Android soon, very very quickly. You can go to the App Store and actually download something that will actually measure how fast your body is losing function. And then at that moment, obviously, we don't want to stop there. The app will start to guide you, basically like Waze, like a traffic navigation app like Waze. It'll basically use the data from all the people that are taking similar paths to you, feed that back to you, and you'll be able to actually know, what can I try today that will actually maybe slow down my rate of aging, and then you'll actually be able to see if it works. So.
Right. And what are some of like the most important things? Obviously it's different for everyone, but like are there some things that you
Yeah.
can tell everybody listening that will, give them a healthier, longer life?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I've learned to give a little bit of an answer to this, even though the true answer you said at the beginning, right, is the what we actually shouldn't keep doing is expecting the thing that that's kind of fitness person on Instagram does is going to actually work for us at a particular time, because we are all different. So yeah, the biggest thing you could do, I'll start with it, is you should be monitoring your health very closely so that you can actually see if that thing that you tried works or not.
Right.
Obviously, we built Humanity for that. I think some of the things are quite simple building blocks. They're not the micro, like how many calories did you have in that particular meal. I will say that. I think, there's things like, constantly moving throughout the day. There's things like not eating, kind of not eating like 20 hours a day, like trying to squish that into, maybe 8 or 10 hours, right? And so you're eating during, say, that 10-hour period, but then the rest of the time you're kind of giving your body, you're fasting, but it's only a half a day fast, right? And so kind of macro things like that, the science starts to show is really working. I will give you I won't go deep into the science, but the interesting thing that the body does in a macro way is when it feels like it's not going to have abundance, it starts to clean itself up. It starts to kind of revise itself, correct some things, get rid of some cells that weren't, really, pulling their weight. And so things like eating during a particular window is an example of that. Your body thinks when it's 9 a.m. in the morning and you haven't had breakfast yet that maybe it's not going to get breakfast for a long time. And so it starts, kind of getting itself in order. Things like constantly moving throughout the day is you're constantly feeding all your cells. So it's not like you're sitting at your desk and like half your cells aren't getting the nutrients that they need. You're constantly moving around. So you start to see a real pattern in what seems to work for the majority of people. And then you just got to monitor yourself so that you can make those adjustments. So
Yeah. And what do you think about aging? I mean, I see, and I don't know a lot about this space, but you see things like Neuralink that Elon's been doing, and obviously that's not directly related to aging, but that's pretty insane that paraplegics and people that have that are paralyzed are now either currently able to use smartphones with like a link in their brain, or will
yeah.
be like in the near future. Like, what's the timeline that you think, right? Because you hear about like CRISPR and like mRNA and like these things Moderna's doing where they have like trials for AIDS vaccines and cancer and things like that. Like, what do
Yep.
you think the timeline is before we're able to like actually cure all disease that we currently kind of like know and have in our lives? And then how far do you think we are from being able to like genetically kind of like choose attributes for babies?
I mean, I'll give a kind of a macro answer and this isn't meant to be an inspirational statement. It's actually just the truth as I see it.
Yeah.
It's our decision how quickly all that stuff happens. As you can see, like a bunch of companies were told, hey, we need a vaccine right now, and they said, okay, we can get it to you in 18 to 24 months, and a bunch of countries said, no, we need it in 6 months, and a bunch of companies said, okay. And at least so far, we've seen that worked out. There's obviously, a risk in moving things too quickly. And so with a lot of these things, expectation is expectation of how fast something happens is actually how fast it happens. And
Right.
so expectation, and then some things are more binary, like expectation that you could actually get rid of aging actually leads to aging getting rid of. And so that's actually part of the battle, is to actually get more people to just have that expectation, as opposed to thinking that it's impossible. Maybe overused, but flight is a great example of that, right? Like, you go just a few years before the Wright brothers and a few other folks finally really started to operationalize flight, just a few years, or even at the same time, honestly. And everybody was saying, and like predominantly saying, like, first of all, either it's impossible, and if it's not impossible, it's a waste of time. It's always the two favorites of everybody. Is like, they say it's impossible, and then when they find out it's impossible, that it's possible, then they're saying, oh well, there's more important things to worry about, right? And so
Right.
there's always nuance and truth to some of those statements. But I think, to answer your question, I think if we actually start to embrace our responsibility, that it is, first of all, our decision how fast these things come to the market, and that pretty much anything other than breaking the speed of light, although maybe someday that will change, is possible, then we need to actually put in the systems to keep it safe and to actually get it out there as fast as it actually is possible to do. And so if say 20% of us on Earth took that attitude, my answer to you would be like, all the stuff that you named would happen in 7 to 8 years. We could easily see that happen in 50 years if we continue to kind of like act as if it's not possible. And some of
Right.
those things, like you named, there's a lot of nuance there. There's going to be, I think what you're going to see with like gene therapy, sorry to like jump around. With gene therapy, one of the things you see with Moderna is hey, maybe we don't need to actually change the gene. Maybe we just start injecting ourselves with some mRNA every once in a while when we do something. So the impermanence might actually play more into gene therapy than we think. But I think all those things are possible, scientifically possible today. It's a question of how quickly it gets out to market. So.
Right. Yeah, I love that. So the last question that we ask everybody on the podcast is, if you could take a time machine and you only had enough time to say one thing, right, about happiness, fulfillment, life in general, what would you say to 18-year-old Michael?
I would say that if you, and this again sounds like an inspirational statement, but I've actually found it to be true, is if you want to do something, you can very much do it. And so the most important decision you need to make today is what you want to do in the next 3, 4, 5 years, not whether you can do it or not. That it's not actually a question of that. So.
I love that. And if people want to learn more about you, if they want to reach out to you, if that's something that you enjoy, or if they want to learn more about humanity, what's the best way to do that?
So humanity's easy right now. You just go to humanity.health. And for me, fairly easy as well. It's mg@humanity.email. And so, yeah, reach out. I love interacting with people, and us as a company, we're highly collaborative. We've created and sold a couple companies. We're looking for impact. So if you want to help us, gain impact and help people's health, then yeah, contact me.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you coming on, brother.
Thanks, Kevin.